This happened over 10 years ago. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We got to our friend's apartment, had some fun, and around midnight decided it was time for us to head back. But when we were asked to be taken back, everyone said no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said they were too drunk or too high, so eventually, we decided to just start walking back, and we would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car and on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even make it halfway before a car slowly starts rolling up behind us. I was 15 at the time, very naive to the ways of the world, and wasn't too concerned. But Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking faster. So we start walking faster and the car picks up their pace behind us and tells me to increase speed. We're moving as fast as we can now, and that's when the car pulled up slightly in front of us and two of the passengers opened the door. Out come two men. Realizing there is no walking faster to get out of this situation, she instructs us to run. She takes off running and I follow. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind the pickup truck, and for a minute we hope and pray that we weren't spotted. This is where the details go a bit fuzzy. One of them must have gone back to the car at some point, as there's only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicates that we were now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. I felt like it was a scene from a movie or video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of God he gives up and decides to go back to his car. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably no more than 20 seconds. We find the pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were hidden behind some fences and bushes and were anxiously waiting to see if we would be discovered. Their car pulls around to the pool house and we're biting our nails hoping they don't get out. The car slowly drives away and we realize we haven't been spotted. We're safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours. They weren't giving up on us. We were safe for the time being, but we needed to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys that we went to hang out with, so short shorts and revealing tops, and were absolutely freezing. We found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls, and we felt completely alone and hopeless. Around 5 a.m. someone finally answered and said that they would pick us up. Best news I ever had in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex but can't find the pool house. The group of men are still circling it, so there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is with a little detective work, figuring out what building they're facing and in front of where. When we zero in on their location, we make a run for it. We spot their car, hop in as fast as we can and just say go, 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 and tell our friend to speed off towards the entrance. We passed the group of men on the way out, and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak back in without my parents ever knowing we had gone. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted, taken, and maybe even ended. I'll never know. So thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up. But a big screw you to the adult men who we went to hang out with as teenagers, and a special screw you to the guys who intended to harm us. On a happier note, I'm now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed the dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter. This must have happened back around 2016 when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne while at the same time taking advantage of him for a free stay for a meeting with my LARP group. For those of you who don't know what LARP is, it's basically real-life role-playing, imagine D&D, but instead of people sitting around a table with dice, you have actual people dressing up as their characters and role-playing in real life. LARPing was my hobby since 14, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I started to go a bit more all out when it came to stuff for my hobby. One of those things I spent a solid amount of money on was my character's armor. The chainmail I wear under my outer armor, that is. After the meeting of my group, I mostly got out of my LARP outfit because I didn't really want to walk through Cologne-Mullum, which is one of the more dangerous places in the city, as a medieval knight. But since I couldn't fit it all in my back, I kept my chainmail on, as well as my tunic and pants. On my bus ride home, I noticed some guy seemed to have an eye on me, but I guessed it was because I still looked very out of place. When he got off at the same station as me, I didn't really pay him much attention. I was almost at my friend's place and decided to call him, asking if we should meet to get a doner, which he agreed to before I even ended my question. I arrived at our meeting spot and waited. Then I noticed that the guy from the bus was again walking straight towards me. I got closer to the wall to make space, but he didn't pass me. He stopped before me and pulled a knife on me, demanding my bag, wallet, and phone. I was willing to give him my wallet, but tried to explain that the bag only had some armor and foam weapons. But it seemed like even talking to him was enough to set this guy off, and suddenly I felt 2 fast, stinging punches in my stomach. It hurt like hell, and I dropped down and the guy grabbed my bag. Honestly, the next thing wasn't really in my mind. I was barely able to notice anything other than the voice in my head screaming, "You got stabbed." And the next thing I noticed was my friend shaking me. My bag was open and all my stuff was all over the place. He was holding my helmet with blood on it, and said that he saw a guy throwing my stuff around after the bag was likely too heavy and big for him to heave around. So my friend, seeing me on the floor, managed to grab the first of the things he could, which was the helmet, and bash the guy with it until he ran away. We later checked my stomach, and even though I had 2 giant deep blue bruises which hurt like hell, I only had small cuts since the chainmail stopped the knife. Until this day, I still get sick to my stomach when I think back on what happened then, and remember that if I had not worn a piece of my LARPing clothing, I would likely be dead, literally killed over a bag full of costumes, 150 euros in my wallet, and a 10-year-old phone. The world is a messed up place. This happened back in early 2015. I was a 19-year-old guy living in a rather bad area of Portland, Oregon. Even though there were occasionally some belligerent homeless people and drug addicts, violent muggings were very rare, and most of the city felt very safe even at night. One of my best friends turned 21, and we decided to go bar hopping and then go clubbing. I was in a group of about a dozen other people, and 3 of which were my roommates. Unfortunately for me, I was the only one in my group who was either under the legal drinking age or did not have a fake ID card. This meant I was unable to enter the bar. However, to my luck, there was a nice Mediterranean restaurant right across the street from the bar, which I ended up going to. I stayed there for more than an hour, and then I was ready to leave. I've done that walk many times, even at night, so I was never scared. Until this night, of course. From my apartment, my roommates took an Uber to the bar. This meant I would have to walk back since I didn't have Uber and my phone battery was running low. The distance back to my apartment was about 3 miles, and the time was already close to midnight, and I would be reaching my apartment by approximately 1 a.m. I decided to walk the distance anyway, since I hadn't been to the gym and thought it would be good exercise. I began my walk and passed by lots of drunks. Even though some of the drunks would shout things at me, I have never felt unsafe or threatened by them, so I was okay. However, the last mile to my apartment was through a darkly lit park that can be scary at night. Not because of any crime, but because there was only one streetlight in that stretch of road. I reached this somewhat creepy area at around 12:30. As I descend down the dark and narrow streets, I notice a black Chevy Silverado speed past me and slow down as he passes. The truck almost comes to a stop, but then decides to drive ahead. I begin to shrug it off at first. However, this is when things start to get creepy. After I walk nearly a quarter mile forwards, the Chevy comes down the opposite direction and does the same thing, when the truck slows down and almost comes to a halt. I begin to panic but not openly show it, and I pretend to ignore the vehicle, but my instincts tell me something isn't right. The truck then starts to proceed, but this time I cannot keep calm. I was in the middle of a dark and isolated park with no streetlights, and there likely wouldn't be a single person in sight. After I walk about 500 feet, I begin to look in horror as the same pickup truck comes flying towards me and suddenly puts a brake about 100 feet behind me. One man about twice my age opens the passenger door and leaps out of the truck carrying what looks like a hockey club. I look behind and lock eyes with him, and he gives me the most haunting and sinister look that I've ever seen from a real person. He begins to yell, "Get out my sight or I'll mess you up, mud slime!" Note, I am of Indian origin and have brown skin, and mud slime was a racial slur directed towards Muslims. As I was planning my escape, I remember how there was a wooded area between the park and my apartment. Where I was, I could cut across the park and go through some woods. Then right across the woods was my apartment. This was smart because I had taken that shortcut during the day and the truck would not be able to cut through the woods. Just as I ran through those words, I heard another yell in the distance, some more choice words thrown my way, but this time by another guy walking on the opposite direction of the sidewalk I was on. I then see another large man walking his German Shepherd towards me. After there, the drunk driver then started running at us with his hockey club, and I made a run for it. I dart towards the woods. Unfortunately, the truck driver decides not to chase up and gets back in his truck. I reach my apartment 5 minutes later, and at the parking lot of my apartment, I happen to see the guy walking his dog. He looks like a roughed-up bodybuilder, so I was a little afraid of him too. However, we had a pleasant conversation, and I begin to head up to my apartment and look at my apartment window. To my disgust and horror, I see the black Chevy drive by my apartment, then leave. My friends came back home close to 3 a.m., just after I went to bed that night. Thankfully, I never saw that creep again, and I moved out of that apartment a few months later. After this incident, I avoid walking alone in dark spots and isolated areas at night. To the stalker driving a black pickup though, I'd rather we not meet again. This happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and studying in Paris, France. I was going home from uni. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day I felt slightly uncomfortable. I could sense some guy looking intently at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time his gaze felt beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him get off the bus. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder and there he was, a few meters behind. I had the distressing feeling his eyes had just looked away the moment I turned. I walked into a shop, took my phone and pretended to be making a call. When I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as quickly as I could. I kept looking back in the busy street. I zigzagged, crossed the street at every crossing, and finally I believed that him getting off at the same stop was just a coincidence. That's until I reached my building. I looked back one last time and there he was, his alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time, and I reached the top floor, squeezing through my door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was ringing. Don't ask me why I picked up. I regretted it the moment I did. I could hear the opposite flat intercom ring as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping someone would pick up. By now, he knew my name. Gabrielle? Oh crap, I felt like a deer in headlights. Open the door, please, said a pleading voice. I just want to talk to you. Somehow I could neither speak nor move. Come to the window. Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy. Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment building. I wasn't going to make that mistake. I hung up in shock and waited by the door without moving for what seemed like hours. When I finally managed to calm myself down, I called my long-distance boyfriend, who instructed me to immediately call the police. Why didn't I think of that? Today it'd be the first thing I do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was. I called my best friend instead. I didn't want to feel alone. I told her about it, and after a while I felt safe, better, and we started laughing, when suddenly the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home and I answered. Gabriel, please open up. I still remember the chill I felt. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent and petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. Gabriel, let me in. I'm so thirsty. Give me some water. This broke the tension and I hung up. Curled in a corner, literally in a recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared to even breathe. The intercom rang again and again. I didn't answer this time. I crouched to the sofa and fell asleep in exhaustion. I heard the intercom ring one more time in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning afraid to leave my apartment and I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note in my mailbox. Gabriel, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened for me. We immediately went to the nearest police station. The police listened and of course told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install a digicode on the building door the same day and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking not to open the door for anyone they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with 2 friends every morning for more than a week, but we never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I used a different route to go to and from uni every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today I'm still very observing of my surrounding. I never answer the door if I'm not expecting someone. And to the people listening, if you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation like mine, call the police. My sibling and I lived close to an elementary school where we would often go to walk our dog in the playing field and crop of woods, or we would let our dog roam around while we played on the playground or made pretend in the woods. I think I was around 14 when this happened, about 10 years ago. The schoolyard has a playing field, a playground near the building, and a playground further away from the building in a crop of trees. We were swinging on the swing set at this more distant playground, but from this play area you could clearly see residential streets and the parking lot of the school, which kind of all wraps around the crop of forest. As we were swinging, I see an SUV drive up one of the roads and pull into the parking lot. It's a weekend, so there are no other cars about, and not very many people. Maybe the odd passerby also walking their dog through the school grounds. The SUV is about 40 meters away from where we were, and I wear glasses, so I can't see very well what the people look like as they exit the car. But I can see some distinct clothing pieces. There are 3 people. 2 look older, and 1 dressed as if they're an older middle-aged person, like in their 50s. I remember one of these people was wearing a wide-brimmed women's sun hat, and the third person looked like an older teen or young adult in his mid-20s, wearing a green and white striped jersey and cleats. It's not uncommon for people to walk or drive to school to use its field for play or sports practice, though looking back now, I realize it's odd they parked in this lot and not on the side of the road near to the field, which is on the opposite side of the property. In any case, I think, okay, just some grandparents and their grandson gonna practice in the field and go about playing with my sibling. I remember watching the trio walk away around the school building, completely opposite to where we were on the property. We have our dog with us, and after a time we decide to stop swinging and take our dog on a walk through the trails in the forest brush. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes have passed since the car pulled up. The brush we are walking in is basically in the very corner of the school property. There is a metal chain link fence in front of us, and beyond it is the sidewalk and residential road. To our right is another fence which separates people's backyards from the school grounds. These homes all have tall trees growing along the school fence for added privacy, so it's almost impossible for anyone to see into the schoolyard. My sibling and I were just at that age where playing pretend didn't really feel genuine and spur of the moment, like we were about to grow out of it. I'm feeling bored and don't want to go home yet, so I pick a branch of these red berries that grow in our schoolyard and say to my sibling, "Hey, wanna play a game?" Which is our code for let's play pretend. And I bend down to offer the berries to my dog as a starting point for the game. I'm still speaking with my sibling, who's walking in front of me as I bent down, but my voice trails off as I see my dog's behavior. She's completely ignoring the berries and me, and is instead moving past me slowly, ears back and nose pointed, as if she approached something. I follow her movement, still looking down. When I finally looked up, there were 3 people from the SUV not 2 meters in front. They were certainly not a couple of grandparents and a kid, but 3 grown men. I remember the faces of the 2 older men pretending to be grandparents. The foremost had short white hair and a white scruff of facial hair. His mouth was open in a faint O shape as he breathed quietly and focused on keeping his steps light. The other man was extremely thin, his cheekbones popping out, and shoulder-length, greasy brown hair hung around his skeletal features. They had crept up behind my sibling and I silently, and remained just as quiet as they all turned their backs quickly and pretended to point off into the trees like they were birds watching something. It was now bizarre how silent the whole encounter was. I immediately realized we need to get the hell out of there, and I turn my attention back to my sibling as I grab my dog's collar and get her hooked up to the leash. My sibling is about a foot from me, but seems oblivious still to the 3 creeps in the wood right behind us. I tell them over and over that we need to leave, but they've become wrapped up in the imaginary game I proposed moments ago. Finally, I see the men. I never looked back at the creeps, only to my sibling, who also starts talking and walking with me. Thankfully, an opening in the fence between the now haunted woods and the road is only a few meters ahead, and we get some distance and obstacles between us and the creeps. To my frustration, my sibling wants to stop on the sidewalk and pick more berries through the fence, and I frantically tell them that we need to get going. I still never look back towards the men, my vision tunneling to the safer area. We managed to get home without incident, at least to my knowledge. Had the men followed us on foot, gone back to their car, or followed, or simply given up? I don't care, I just wanted to go home, which was only a few blocks away. And when I got home, I broke down. I told my mom what happened, and I remember her reaction being kind of nonchalant. I had always been an anxious child, and she had developed a habit of downplaying things in a kind of exposure therapy way. I realized I still didn't feel fully safe with this reaction and retreated to my basement to cry alone. In recounting the story with my mum years later, she said she did call the police but nothing came of it. I'm also thankful for my dog, as she is very likely the reason that we weren't taken or worse that day. And in the years since, I've become highly skilled in reading people's body language, and I can tell when someone's lying. I can read people's emotions and intentions like a book, and can tell if someone's vibe is off from a good distance away. which has become a blessing and a curse. In any case, I'm glad I never ran into these 3 guys again. 3 years ago, I went on vacation with my family. We stayed in a hotel right next to the beach, and every night my family and I went for a drink or an evening stroll on the promenade. The promenade itself was always filled with a lot of people, especially couples enjoying a beautiful evening walk. On the 3rd day, I couldn't sleep. My brother was still awake, but we had a flight earlier, so I didn't ask him to come on my walk. Now, before you think I was being stupid, it was midnight, and still the promenade was filled with people. So I put on some loose pants and a shirt, nothing fancy, and went on a walk. For context, I'm a 21-year-old female, and normally I'm quite aware of my surroundings, especially at night. But since there were so many people around, I just put my earphones in and listened to some relaxing music. The walk started off great. I was watching the beautiful nightlife on the promenade and the other resorts as well. 30 minutes later, I sat on a bench to tie my shoelace, and from the corner of my eye, I noticed a man also stopping and sitting down 2 benches away from me, but I didn't find it suspicious. Yet. I started to walk again and noticed the man also getting up and walking about 20 meters behind me. I slowed down my pace and put my earphones in my pocket. I was getting suspicious but wanted to know for sure. Again, I stopped and pretended to be searching for something on my phone, and he stopped as well. The problem with the promenade is that it's one long line, so I had to pass the creepy man to return to my hotel. Since I was still surrounded by people, I felt somewhat safe. In my head, I had the most genius plan to go down to the beach and hide behind one of the beach chairs. The beach was pitch black, and in my mind, this was the best solution. I started to speed up. The creepy man did not match my pace yet, and then a big group of people passed me, and I made a run to the beach and hid. 30 seconds later, I saw him looking from the promenade in my direction. He was searching for me. I was hoping he'd give up, but he started making his way towards the beach chairs. At that moment, I didn't think, and started running on the beach. Once I was far enough, I went back to the promenade and sprinted, completely soaked in sweat, and I stopped in front of my hotel and looked back. I had lost the creepy man and rushed back to my room. That was the only and last time I went walking alone. I know I should have asked for help from people around me, so just because you're surrounded by people doesn't mean you're safe. And to the creepy man who stalked me in Crete, let's not meet. This happened 3 years ago. I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark at the time and I lived in a pretty rough part of the city. For context, I was a 26-year-old woman with medium-length bleach blonde hair, curvy and 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. I've had sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of in the past, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk home alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety just in case. About halfway home, and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned. It's embarrassing how desensitizing this is, and I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic, heading into the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I wasn't scared. This was happening so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for this kind of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly that I wasn't interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical and might have been twin or brothers. Both men had very dark complexions, dark eyes and short hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away from them. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me, but they didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a pervert to leave me alone, and that is when I began to feel unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to piss off. I thought it finally worked, and it must have been 3 minutes that I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. But just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, the van pulled me up very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men out of the van opened the back door and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he were about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagined that's what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in a live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and sped off. I've never been the same since that night, and I'm afraid of walking alone now even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. And to the people in the van, I hope karma finds both of you soon. To start out, I'm a 19-year-old female in LA County, California. The town I am in is very notorious for everything from gang violence to trafficking to kidnappings, so being alone is considered quite dangerous. Despite this fact, I am somewhat street smart and cautious, so I don't worry too much about it. I've had a few encounters, but most were guys just trying to hit on me in trucks or staring at my ass as they passed. So this one is the closest and probably the scariest one for me. I'm a little more on the heavier side, and decided it would be nice to try start getting back into going on runs or even just walks. So with that, I get dressed, make myself a bottle of water for when I come home, and leave my complex door open, since I'm leaving my keys, and head over to Set Park. So there are a few ways to get there, because it's all connected, but I decide to go the long way to get warmed up and try to get into a groove. When I get to the park, I notice right away that these two men are sitting in a black semi-tinted car in front of the main play structure and right where I was going to do laps. I kind of felt weird about it, but remembered a lot of people over here in the park choose random spots to play Pokemon Go, so I decided it could be that. For the laps, I wanted to try and do walk 3, jog 2. So after 3 sets of this, I look over to notice if they're still there, and they are, staring at me with their phones almost out, as if to look busy. My gut tells me something isn't right about it, but again, I just shrug it off and continue on my workout. I'm getting a little out of breath, and on my 4th set I start to slow down, which is when I see one of the men get out of the car and awkwardly walk towards this blue van that I never noticed before in front of them. He opened the door, and I swear to God I saw a rag, rope, and tape on the seat, and him fumbling with it as if to get it ready for something. He looked over his shoulder to see me staring at him, and he jumps into the back seat like he was hiding from me. My mind was screaming at me to leave, so I went the long way back to not only make sure he didn't follow me, but also because their cars were blocking my way. I looked back to check, and they were both gone. So I hurried back home to my apartment building only to see them at the end of my street. When I finally reach it, they spot me and make a U-turn coming down my street towards me and my apartment. So I sprint to my gate, and just as soon as I got in, they pulled over and jumped out. By some miracle, they gave up and sped away, leaving me terrified. Later, I told my boyfriend what happened, but only what happened at the park so I didn't scare him, and he told me to call the non-emergency tip line to let them know, but I didn't want to out of fear of being called dramatic. It was this morning, and I finally decided to try and call them 10 minutes ago, But just as I feared, they called me stupid, even after me telling them what happened outside my apartment, that they couldn't do anything for me, and hung up. Just for everyone who might hear this, follow your gut and stay safe. This happened almost 20 years ago, when I was a 15-year-old girl. I had an older neighbor who taught drums and was a friend of the family. I would take drum lessons from him once a week, and he only lived about half a block away, so I would always walk, and he and his family lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. Well, one summer day when I was walking home at 4 p.m., broad daylight in a quiet neighborhood, there was a strange man standing across from the end of the cul-de-sac. He had on a big cowboy hat and some facial hair. It was a bit odd for my area. I don't know, he appeared to be in his 30s and was just staring at me. He was watching me unabashedly as I walked down the cul-de-sac and crossed the street, and once my back was to him, I could hear that he was following me. My heart sped up. My drumsticks seemed like weak protection, and I was wearing these thin little flip-flops, and I remember thinking if I had to kick him, they weren't going to help me at all. Less than half a block away from me was a more busy street, and I remember thinking if I could just get to the street where people would see, he would surely back off. But his steps sounded closer, and I could taste my panic, knowing I wasn't going to make it. I ended up running up to a house where I kind of knew the family. I knew a mum with young kids was probably there, and pounded on her door and tried to open it myself even in the panic. She opened it and I spilled into her house and locked the door, told her what happened, and let my heart calm down a little. After being inside for 15 minutes, I asked if I could just hop her back fence to go home, since it would cut out a block of travel. But when we slid back the drapes of her back door, the dude was leaning against the fence, right over her house, where he could see both the front and back door. She ended up loading her kids in the car and driving me home, and later her husband asked around. Turned out the dude was living with his mother and had just gotten out of jail, though I never found out the charges. All that I know is that my stomach had been twisted into knots, and it was the first time I tasted fear like that. I don't know what would have happened to me had he caught me. To preface this, I was around 15 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to play a few games like Mario Party, Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together there were 5 girls and 1 boy. After a while, my best friends asked if we'd like to go to the playground, which is around 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how dangerous it could be since the majority of us were young girls and it being 10 p.m. We walked down to the park and continued playing grounders while we arrived. Which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary school. The rules are that one person is it. The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on the playground in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets you off the equipment and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, they're tagged. It's a childish game but fun. After a few rounds we got bored and decided to huddle around the circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back. I hushed the group and looked over at my best friend asking if she heard that, and everyone looked at me as if I'd had 10 heads. When she asked what I meant, I told her what it sounded like. She responded with the classic, "Ooh, someone's coming in to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid, but I have good intentions, and something felt off. A few minutes later, after more rocks were thrown at the fence and I obsessively stare at the area behind the fence, I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street, that connected the street of the park, since you can vaguely see the headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized that it was only one light and it was bouncing up and down as if it was being held by someone walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me, and we all snapped our heads over in that direction. Coming up along the side, near the house on the left side of the park, was a man who wore some hat, white baggy dirty sweatpants and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone but an actual one. He was too far away to guess his age, and he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. We all collectively agreed he was odd, seeming by his clothes anyway, and he appeared to be in his mid-20s and just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a bunch of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride or just resting for a moment, so we tried to brush off the fact that he was sitting and intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to our group. He went from just sitting on one of the swings furthest away, to the next swing to a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next until he was about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he was observing, and at this point all of us have noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us. In an attempt to remove ourselves from potential danger, we made the group decision to leave. We got up, all piled off the playground equipment and into pairs, and walked down the stairs on the side furthest away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first. The man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance, and I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up with the others too. And wouldn't you know, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turns we take, but also started screaming that he was going to end our lives, and calling us numerous choice words. At this point, the whole group bursts out to a sprint. The adrenaline made me feel like I ran so fast that I was ahead of everyone. All of us were ushering each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That's until I heard my best friend struggling to run, as she has bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her, so I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this, we have to go now." This whole time, the man was still running and screaming behind us and catching up quick. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace she could keep up with. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if even that much, and as we all piled in through the garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big, fluffy savior ran to open the door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after him. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark, lamp-lit street. So we were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake, but most comforting, our big, fluffy hero, in case he decided to return. I was riding my bike around my apartment building as a kid when I ran into some bullies from school. Now, as a kid, I had a problem with shutting up and had no idea how to, and I pissed them off. I was riding my bike as fast as possible to get away from them as they were also on bikes, when something on the ground made my bike fly into the air. A few things to note at the time. I was a tiny girl who was about 70-pound tops, and I was poor, so my bike was used and rusty, but most importantly missing handlebar grips. The combination of speed, my weight, and the object I hit launched me more up than forward. So I hit something, the bike fell on its side, and then I fell on the bike. I felt like it knocked the wind out of me, but I knew it had to be bad because of one of the bullies pedaled away as quickly as possible, and the other one helped me home and said that it didn't make us friends. We left our bikes where they were, but I didn't care. My midsection hurt so badly from where I landed on it. I got home and my mum turned to greet me and practically screamed because I was bleeding. I looked down and realized I wasn't just bleeding, but a lot of blood was gushing from my stomach, and I fainted. I woke up at the hospital later to find out that I had landed on a bike handle which impaled me through my midsection about halfway through my body. It missed my organs by millimeters and left me with a neat scar and a story no one believes until I pull my top up for them to see. In 1986, my parents planned a trip to Disney in Florida. A random man tried to kidnap my half-brother by snatching him and running. He was tackled, my brother was safely returned to us, and nothing happened to the guy as he disappeared into the crowd. Fast forward to 1989, in Ohio at a pop-up circus in a field. I was given change to go get popcorn, and a man dressed as a clown approached me and after several minutes of talking grabbed me. Bystanders saw the ordeal, and a random man with exquisite sideburns chased down the man who had thrown me into his pickup truck and gunned it. Mr. Sideburns and another man were able to pull me from the vehicle and stop the truck as it rolled into a parking lot and hit several parked vehicles. I was fine other than a forehead scrape from hitting the dash. The clown was not a circus performer or associated with it. He was an opportunistic predator. I can't even say if these events were the worst parts of my childhood, but they definitely are up there. And from that day forth, I have always hated clowns. This happened a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it as it was one of the strangest encounters me and my family ever had. One time as a child, I went with my family to the grocery store. It was our monthly trip to stock up on groceries, and we were going to be there a while. I was about 12 at the time, so by that age I had a good understanding of how to read people. We started in the produce aisle, and suddenly a strange man caught my eye. He was standing awkwardly close to us, sort of fake browsing the vegetables. His body language seemed off. He was standing with his back to us, but something seemed odd about the way he was positioned. As we slowly moved down the aisle, he would slowly rotate so his back was always facing us. As we got a little closer, I could tell he was wearing those see-behind glasses, those gimmicky glasses that have hidden mirrors on the sides of the lens so that you can see behind yourself. He had a dirty grey zip-up jacket on and long, dark, messy hair, and had to be in his 40s. Our shopping went on, and wherever we went, we would see him standing there, across the store. He would keep his distance from us, but he was always within eyesight no matter where we went. After half hour in, my mum still hadn't noticed, but he was starting to really creep me out, and my mum didn't believe me at first. Eventually, we got to the refrigerator aisles, and this is where it got weird. Whichever aisle we were in, he would quickly pace us occasionally, and at that point, he wasn't even trying to look like he was shopping. My mum and sister were starting to notice this and getting concerned. At one point, we were grabbing something off the shelf, and I could see him just standing on the opposite aisle peeking through the shelves at us. His sunglasses were still on, but his hood was up. We started to walk faster and do some random zigzags around the store to see if he really was following us and try to lose him, but he would keep up, all in a very sneaky way at that. He would always be at the opposite end of the aisle, but he kept up with us the whole time. By this point, my mum was concerned, so we pushed the cart up to customer service and speak to a manager about it, by which point, of course, we lost him. We informed the manager, who was very helpful, and actually went to find the guy and speak with him. We waited at the counter until she paced back to us with a confused look on her face. She walked to my mother and told us, "He said you're his mum?" By this point, my mum and sister were concerned. The manager rang us up and said we should leave and they would escort the strange man. We walked out of the car, staying close to our mother, when we were met with a horrible sight. The man was just standing across the parking lot near our car with his head slightly tilted and a big grin on his face. We floored it out of there, but we could still see him standing there watching us as we left. Whoever the guy was, I never want to find out.